Welcome to the channel. Today we've got something incredible for you. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. In a forgotten corner of London, nestled beneath the layers of time, lies a family secret hidden away for centuries. A velvet box sealed tight with a promise of silence waits, waiting for the one who dares to uncover its truth. But some truths are not meant to be found. Will the key unlock the past or awaken something far darker? Tonight, you will hear the beginning of a tale where silence holds more power than words, and the past is never truly gone. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Box. The soft, rhythmic tapping of the clock on the mantel was the only sound that filled the room as Dr. John Watson stepped into 221B Baker Street. It was a typical autumn evening, the kind that seemed to wrap London in a cloak of mystery, with the damp air clinging to the cobblestones outside and the gas lamps casting long golden shadows on the pavement. Watson had just returned from his rounds at St. Bartholomew's Hospital, but there was something about this evening that felt different, a strange anticipation in the air. Inside, Sherlock Holmes sat at his desk, completely absorbed in his work. His back was slightly hunched, the familiar outline of his silhouette illuminated by the flickering light of a solitary lamp. He was surrounded by papers, his mind as sharp as ever, always chasing after a new puzzle. His pipe, now cold, sat forgotten on the side, but his eyes gleamed with a glint of excitement as he caught sight of Watson. "Ah, Watson, just the man I was waiting for," Holmes said, his voice laced with a mix of amusement and intrigue. He gestured toward a small, velvet-covered box that sat delicately on the edge of his desk, its presence somehow commanding attention despite its unassuming size. Watson, always the skeptic but curious nonetheless, raised an eyebrow. "What's this, Holmes? Another one of your strange cases?" Holmes smiled, his fingers lightly tracing the contours of the box. "Not just any case, Watson. This is something quite unusual. You see, I was visited by a young woman this afternoon, Eleanor Matthews. She has come to me with this box, claiming that it has been passed down through generations in her family. It has remained unopened for decades, and yet she believes that it holds something of great significance, something that could solve a deep family mystery." The box, small but finely crafted, was wrapped in rich purple velvet. It was an elegant piece, its fabric smooth to the touch, but the weight of it suggested something hidden beneath the surface. The colour of the velvet seemed almost too deep, as if it had absorbed the very essence of secrets. There were no locks, no visible means of entry. Yet, as Watson peered closer, he could not help but feel an almost magnetic pull toward it. "Is there anything you can deduce from it?" Watson asked, a hint of skepticism in his voice. "It seems harmless enough." Holmes, still deep in thought, picked it up carefully and turned it over in his hands. His fingers lingered over the edges, tracing an intricate pattern of embroidery along the sides. "I believe this box was designed with a very specific purpose in mind. It's not merely a piece of decoration, Watson. There's something hidden within it, a secret waiting to be unlocked. But it's not simply a matter of finding a key or opening it in the conventional sense." Holmes paused for a moment, his gaze fixed on the box, and then turned to Watson with a spark in his eye. "You see, the key to opening this box is not a physical one. It is mental, and perhaps even emotional." Watson felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't often that Holmes spoke in such a manner. His voice, usually so rational, had taken on an almost ethereal tone. He leaned forward, his curiosity now piqued. "What do you mean by emotional, Holmes?" Holmes gave a small, cryptic smile. "The box is locked not by a physical lock, but by something deeper. a hidden message or perhaps a puzzle. I have no doubt that there is a mechanism inside it that requires a certain alignment of thought. It is not the box that is truly mysterious, Watson. It is the mind that must unlock it. As Watson stood silently, contemplating Holmes's words, the room seemed to grow quieter. The light from the lamp flickered slightly, casting shadows that danced across the walls. It was as if the very atmosphere had shifted, becoming thick with unspoken thoughts and possibilities. The box, though still, now seemed to hum with an invisible energy. Holmes's voice broke the silence. The mystery of this box, Watson, is not in what it holds, but in how it has remained closed for so long. It has been passed down through generations, and yet no one has been able to open it. That in itself is what makes this case fascinating. Watson studied Holmes closely, sensing the anticipation that hung in the air. Holmes had a way of seeing things that others simply couldn't, and it was clear to him that this box was not merely an object. It was a key to something far greater. And then, just as Watson was about to speak, a soft knock echoed from the door. Holmes's eyes flicked toward the sound. "Ah, speak of the devil," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Our visitor has arrived." As Watson turned to the door, a sense of anticipation filled the room, thickening the air like the calm before a storm. What was this mystery that awaited them? The box, so simple and yet so intriguing, now seemed to carry the weight of an unknown destiny. The story of Eleanor Matthews, the box and the secrets it held had only just begun. And in that moment, Watson knew that whatever lay ahead would require more than just intellect. It would demand a willingness to embrace the unknown. Chapter 2. The First Clue. The following morning, a heavy fog blanketed London, turning the streets into a blur of grey mist. Dr. John Watson arrived at Baker Street with the lingering feeling of unease from the night before. He had been unable to shake the impression that there was more to the velvet box than he could understand, and the strange cryptic words Holmes had spoken echoed in his mind like a riddle that refused to be solved. Upon entering the apartment, Watson found Holmes once again in front of the desk, his fingers delicately tracing the contours of the box. His face was deep in thought, yet there was an unmistakable intensity in his expression. Holmes was on the edge of a discovery, and Watson could feel it in the air. "Good morning, Watson," Holmes greeted him without lifting his eyes. "You will find that I've been preoccupied with our little puzzle. I am convinced we are very close to uncovering something significant, but I need your help." Watson, eager to learn what had occupied Holmes's thoughts, walked over to the desk. "Have you made any progress?" he asked, peering over Holmes's shoulder at the velvet box, still as enigmatic as ever. Holmes nodded thoughtfully, still tracing the embroidered pattern along the edges of the box. "I've been considering the message engraved on the bottom. To unravel the past, one must first embrace the silence. It is quite peculiar. It suggests that the box does not merely conceal something, but rather requires a state of mind to unlock it." Watson raised an eyebrow. "A state of mind?" "Indeed," Holmes replied. "I believe the box demands a certain silence, not just in the physical sense, but in the mind. Perhaps the key to opening it is not one of noise, but of quiet reflection, a stillness of thought. If one is to find the secret it holds, they must first silence the noise of the world." Holmes's words, though cryptic, stirred something deep inside Watson. It was true. The more he thought about it, the more the box seemed to beckon with a quiet intensity, as though it was waiting for the right moment, the right understanding, to reveal itself. Holmes looked up, his eyes sharp with insight. "Watson, I have a theory. The pattern on the box, it is not random, it is too deliberate. I believe these intricate stitches serve as a clue, possibly directing us toward a specific alignment of thought. But it could be more than that. There might be a mechanism hidden within it, waiting to be activated. The words "hidden mechanism" lingered in Watson's mind, filling him with both excitement and trepidation. Could it be possible? Could there truly be a hidden lock or mechanism within the box that they had overlooked? It seemed like an improbable theory, yet knowing Holmes as well as he did, Watson trusted that his deductions were rarely wrong. Holmes turned the box over in his hands, the weight of it seeming heavier now, as if something within was stirring, ready to be discovered. He gently ran his fingers over the seam at the base, his touch light and careful. "It's almost as if the box is speaking to me," Holmes murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can feel something, a subtle vibration in the air. It's faint, but it's there, just beneath the surface. The box is waiting for something." Watson watched in silence, unsure whether Holmes was referring to some intuition or a physical sensation. But then, as if on cue, Holmes's eyes widened and he let out a soft exclamation. "There," he said, pointing to a tiny, almost imperceptible notch on the box. "I've found it. There's a hidden seam here, one that's almost invisible. This must be the place." With a steady hand, Holmes took a thin blade and carefully pried at the seam, the velvet fabric yielding with a soft, almost inaudible sound. Slowly, ever so gently, the hidden compartment at the bottom of the box began to open, revealing a small, intricately folded piece of parchment. Holmes's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he carefully unfolded the parchment. The paper was old, yellowed with age but still intact. The ink was faded but the words were clear. "To my descendants," Holmes read aloud. "The key to this box lies in your ability to listen to the silence of your own heart. What is hidden within is not meant for all eyes, but for those who understand that true secrets are those that remain unspoken. You must prove yourself worthy by solving the puzzle of your own making." Watson felt a chill run down his spine as he processed the words. The letter was strange, almost foreboding in its tone. What puzzle was it referring to? And what did it mean by "prove yourself worthy"? Holmes folded the letter back carefully and placed it on the desk. "This, Watson, is the first true clue. It confirms my suspicion. The box is not merely a physical puzzle. It is a test of character, of intellect, and perhaps of moral worth. We are dealing with something far more intricate than a simple lock." Watson leaned back in his chair, absorbing the weight of the moment. "But what now, Holmes? What do we do next?" Holmes's lips curled into a small, enigmatic smile. "Next, Watson, we must reflect. The answer to this puzzle lies not in further examination but in contemplation. We must let the silence guide us. The box will not open for those who rush to find its secret. We must wait for it to reveal itself when the time is right." There was something deeply soothing in Holmes's voice, a sense of calm that settled over Watson. Despite the complexity of the mystery, there was an undeniable comfort in knowing that the answer, though elusive, would come in its own time. For the first time in their investigation, Watson felt a quiet certainty. The box was not just a mystery to be solved, it was a story to be lived, and perhaps the real secret was not in what they would find, but in what they would discover about themselves along the way. As the fog outside thickened, enveloping London in its gentle embrace, Watson could not help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden within the silence of the velvet box, and how long would it take before it was ready to speak. Chapter 3. A mysterious visitor. The fog that had draped London in its silken embrace the night before had not yet lifted. The city's streets, though alive with the usual bustle, seemed to move in a dreamlike haze. The distant hum of carriages and the soft murmur of the crowd outside 221B Baker Street did little to pierce the stillness of the room within. Sherlock Holmes sat at his desk, his mind as focused as ever, but his hands idle. The velvet box lay in front of him, its deep purple fabric catching the soft light from the gas lamp. Holmes had spent the better part of the morning analysing the faint markings on the letter they had discovered the night before. The cryptic message seemed to be more of a riddle than a simple instruction, and the more he reflected on it, the more he realised the complexity of the puzzle they were dealing with. As Watson entered the room, he noticed immediately that Holmes was far more absorbed in thought than usual. His eyes, usually so sharp, were distant, lost in contemplation. "Holmes, you look deep in thought," Watson remarked, setting down his medical bag and removing his coat. "Have you made any progress with the box?" Holmes did not immediately respond. Instead, he placed a finger to his lips, his eyes scanning the room with a certain intensity that Watson had come to associate with one of Holmes's most urgent moments of deduction. "The box, Watson," Holmes said softly, his voice unusually calm. "It's not just the puzzle within that concerns me now. It's the message we uncovered. It speaks of silence, of hidden truths, and of tests that one must undergo to prove their worth. I am beginning to think that we are not just solving a mystery. We are being tested in some way." Watson, though familiar with Holmes's unusual way of thinking, could not help but feel a shiver run down his spine. "Tested, Holmes? What do you mean by that?" Holmes paused, his eyes narrowing as he gazed at the box. What if this box is not meant for us alone? What if it was designed to test someone else? Someone who has the key to unlock its secrets but who must first pass a trial, or... Holmes's voice trailed off as he turned toward the door. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts, and Watson glanced up, his curiosity piqued. "Come in," Holmes called, his voice resuming its usual clarity. The door creaked open, and in stepped a woman, young, elegant, and clearly distressed. Her wide eyes and hurried steps gave her an air of urgency, yet there was something oddly serene in the way she carried herself. She was draped in a dark coat, the collar turned up against the chill, but there was no hiding the sense of quiet desperation she exuded. "Mr. Holmes?" The woman's voice was soft, but there was a tremor of emotion in it. "I've come to consult with you. My name is Eleanor Matthews, and I need your help." Holmes rose from his chair at once, his keen eyes already observing the fine details of the woman before him. "Miss Matthews," he said, his tone neutral yet welcoming, "what brings you to me this morning?" Eleanor Matthews stepped forward, clutching her hands together in front of her. She looked from Holmes to Watson, her expression a mixture of hope and worry. I need to ask for your help with something of great importance. Something I can't explain easily." She glanced down at the velvet box on Holmes's desk, and a flicker of recognition passed through her eyes. "You see, Mr. Holmes, this box," she continued, "has been in my family for generations. It was passed down from my great-grandfather to my father, and now it is mine. But there is a mystery surrounding it, a mystery I cannot solve alone. My family has kept this box closed for as long as I can remember, and I've been told that its contents are meant to remain hidden until the right moment." Watson noticed that Eleanor's hands were trembling, her voice growing softer with each word she spoke. It was clear that this woman, though calm on the surface, was grappling with a deep sense of anxiety. "What is it you believe this box contains?" Holmes asked, his gaze piercing. Eleanor hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "I don't know for certain, Mr. Holmes, but I have reason to believe that this box holds the key to an old family secret, one that my father never spoke of, but that he hinted at in his final days, a secret that I believe could change everything. Holmes regarded her with a mix of intrigue and compassion. You said that your family has kept this box closed for generations. But why, Miss Matthews? Why is it that no one has attempted to open it until now? Eleanor's eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and longing. Because we were told not to. My father, before he passed away, spoke of a time when the box would reveal its secrets, but he also warned that only someone worthy could uncover them. He said that the moment of revelation would come when the box was no longer just an object, but a key to understanding who we are, who our family truly is. Holmes stood motionless for a moment, his mind racing as he processed the words. There was something profoundly unsettling about the idea of a family heirloom that held such weight, both literally and metaphorically. A key that required someone worthy to unlock it. Was this truly just a family mystery, or was there something more at play? And so, you have come to me because you believe that I might be able to help unlock this secret? Holmes asked, his voice soft but filled with intent. Eleanor nodded, her eyes pleading. I don't know who else to turn to. I've tried everything, but the box remains closed. My family believes it is a curse, something best left undisturbed. But I cannot move forward with my life, Mr. Holmes. I need to understand. Holmes took a deep breath, his mind already formulating a plan. I will take the case, Miss Matthews. But understand this. The box you have brought to me is not just an object. It is a puzzle with far-reaching implications. The key to its secret lies not just in unlocking the box, but in understanding what it represents and who is meant to open it. As Eleanor Matthews sat down, a quiet sense of resolve settled in the room. The mystery had just deepened, and it was clear that the velvet box was no longer just an object of curiosity. It was a test that would challenge not only the intellect of Sherlock Holmes, but the very fabric of the Matthews family's history. And as the clock ticked on, Holmes knew one thing for certain. The box had chosen its moment, and its secrets, hidden for so long, were about to come to light. Chapter 4. The Silence of the Box. The days following Eleanor Matthews' visit were filled with a quiet intensity. A fine mist still clung to London's streets, adding an air of mystery to the city that perfectly mirrored the enigma they faced at 221B Baker Street. The velvet box, now a focal point of Holmes's attention, lay untouched on his desk. Holmes, deep in his thoughts, had given it only a cursory inspection since Eleanor's departure. He was waiting for the right moment, the right frame of mind, to engage with the puzzle it contained. Dr. John Watson, always pragmatic but unable to resist the pull of Holmes's investigations, was also intrigued by the case. Yet there was something about the box that troubled him, something beyond its physicality, something he couldn't quite place. It had an almost eerie stillness to it, as though it was waiting for something to happen, for someone to unlock its mystery. Watson could feel it too, the quiet anticipation that filled the room when Holmes was around it. Holmes, Watson began one morning as he pored over his medical notes, trying to distract himself from the unsettling presence of the box. You've been quiet these past few days. Have you discovered anything more about Miss Matthews's box? Holmes didn't immediately respond. His eyes remained fixed on the box, his fingers lightly grazing the velvet as if he were trying to decipher some hidden message in its fabric. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Holmes spoke, his voice as calm and steady as ever, but carrying an undercurrent of something deeper. I believe the box is trying to tell me something, Watson. Not with its contents, but with its silence. Watson frowned, his curiosity piqued. Its silence? Yes. The box has a presence, Watson. A silence that fills the room every time I touch it. I cannot explain it fully, but it's as though the very air around it grows thicker, heavier. This silence, it is not empty. It holds something. And I believe it holds the key to the puzzle. Watson could feel the weight of Holmes's words, the gravity of them settling into his chest. Silence. It was such a simple concept, but Holmes made it sound like a force to be reckoned with, a thing that could shape the course of their investigation. Holmes picked up the box, turning it over in his hands as though waiting for it to reveal itself. He ran his fingers over the smooth velvet surface and then stopped, his gaze fixed on something Watson could not see. The intensity in Holmes's eyes sharpened, as if a sudden thought had struck him like a bolt of lightning. This box is not meant to be opened through force, Watson, Holmes murmured, almost to himself. It resists brute effort, not just because of its design, but because it has been waiting. It is waiting for the right moment, the right approach. It is waiting for someone who understands that silence is a form of communication. Holmes set the box down carefully, his eyes never leaving it. Watson, though baffled by Holmes's train of thought, couldn't help but be drawn into the mystery. There was something deeply soothing in the way Holmes spoke about the box, an undercurrent of certainty, yet tinged with reverence. It was as if the box were not just an object, but a living thing, with its own will. Silence, Holmes? You're saying that the box has been designed to be opened only when someone understands the silence it holds? Watson asked, trying to wrap his mind around the concept. Holmes nodded slowly, his gaze softening as he turned to face Watson. Exactly. The engraving on the bottom, the cryptic message about unraveling the past. It's all a clue, Watson. This box is not a mere puzzle. It is a riddle of the mind, a challenge that requires patience, introspection. It will not yield to impatience or brute force. Watson took a deep breath. Holmes's deductions often had a way of defying logic, and yet he found himself once again believing in his friend's brilliance. So, how do we approach this silence, Holmes? How do we begin to unravel its mystery? Holmes didn't respond immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if listening to something only he could hear. The silence in the room deepened, stretching out, almost tangible. Then, with a soft exhalation, Holmes spoke. We must listen, Watson. Not just with our ears, but with our minds and our hearts. This box does not speak through sound, it speaks through its absence. The silence it holds is not empty. It is filled with meaning. Holmes rose from his chair and walked to the window, his silhouette framed by the pale light of the late morning. The fog had lifted somewhat, but the city still seemed muffled, as though wrapped in a heavy blanket. Holmes stood there for a long time, his back to Watson, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. Holmes, what are you thinking? Watson asked, his voice carrying an undertone of concern. Holmes turned to face Watson, his eyes reflecting the quiet intensity that had settled in him. I think that it is time, Watson. Time to approach the box not as a puzzle to be solved, but as an invitation to understand something deeper, something hidden in the silence. Without another word, Holmes moved to the desk, picking up the velvet box once more. He held it in his hands as if it were fragile yet precious, an object of both great mystery and quiet power. For a moment there was nothing but the soft sound of his breathing and the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. And then, as if on cue, something remarkable happened. The silence, which had so long filled the room, seemed to shift. The air grew even thicker, more palpable. Holmes's hands trembled ever so slightly, a rare sign of emotion breaking through his usually composed demeanor. Slowly, almost reverently, he placed the box in front of him and began to trace the delicate, patterns on its surface once more. Watson watched in awe, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. There was an energy in the room, a subtle vibration that seemed to hum with anticipation. And then, as Holmes's fingers passed over a particularly ornate stitch on the velvet, the box moved, just slightly, but enough for Holmes to pause. A quiet click echoed in the room. Watson leaned forward, his breath catching in his throat. Could it be? Had they finally found the key to unlocking the mystery? Holmes smiled, but it was a small, enigmatic smile, one that seemed to acknowledge the moment of quiet triumph without revealing the full extent of what had been discovered. "Patience, Watson," Holmes said softly. "The box has revealed a clue. But this is just the beginning. We must now listen more carefully than ever." The room was still, the silence deepening once again. But this time it was not the same. It was the silence of discovery, the silence before the flood of revelation. Chapter 5. Unlocking the Past. The morning that followed Holmes's breakthrough with the velvet box was heavy with the weight of anticipation. The quiet of the room at 221B Baker Street seemed to hum with a newfound energy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Outside, London was bathed in the soft glow of dawn, the mist having receded just enough to reveal the busy streets below. Yet, within the confines of the apartment, there was only the silence, the kind of silence that invites contemplation, that lingers like an unanswered question. Sherlock Holmes sat at his desk, the velvet box before him, his fingers resting lightly on its surface. He had not touched it since the small, almost imperceptible click that had broken the stillness the night before. The box, as though sensing the attention it was receiving, seemed to breathe in tandem with the room, still but not lifeless, like a forgotten memory stirring to life. Dr. John Watson, though accustomed to the peculiar rhythms of Holmes's investigations, couldn't shake the feeling that something momentous was unfolding before him. The morning had felt quieter than usual, as if the world itself was waiting for the next step in this strange journey. Despite his medical background, Watson felt himself drawn into the mystery of the velvet box. What was it about the object that held such power? Why did it seem to resist explanation, as though it had a will of its own? Holmes, who had been watching the box intently, finally broke the silence. "Watson," he said, his voice steady but with an edge of excitement beneath its calm surface, "I believe we are close to unlocking something far greater than we initially imagined." Watson, sitting across from him, leaned forward. "You've discovered something, Holmes. What is it?" Holmes did not respond immediately. Instead, he slowly lifted the box and for the first time turned it over completely in his hands. The underside, where once only the faintest markings had been visible, now revealed something else entirely. A subtle seam had appeared, almost invisible to the naked eye, and along its edges there were faint, almost imperceptible indentations. Watson leaned closer, watching in silent awe. "A seam," he murmured. Holmes nodded, his fingers hovering just above it. "Yes, Watson. It is as if the box is revealing itself to us piece by piece, only when it is ready." The silence it held was not a mere absence of sound. It was a form of protection, a shield to keep us from unlocking its secret too soon. With deliberate care, Holmes placed the box back on the desk, his movements slow, almost reverent. He seemed to be allowing the moment to linger, as if savouring the sensation of being on the precipice of a great discovery. He then reached for a thin, delicate tool, something that looked like a miniature crowbar, custom-made for such precise work, and gently inserted it into the newly revealed seam. At first, nothing happened. The box remained stubbornly closed, the tension in the air thickening. But then, a soft click echoed through the room, and the lid of the box shifted ever so slightly. It was the same sound they had heard before, but now it was louder, more definite, a signal that something had changed. Holmes's eyes gleamed, and a small, knowing smile tugged at the corners of his lips. The puzzle has begun to unravel, Watson. But we must be cautious. The true nature of this box is far from simple. With a steady hand, Holmes gently lifted the lid. As it opened, a rush of air seemed to fill the room, and for a moment, Watson could almost feel a shift in the atmosphere, a quiet, almost imperceptible change, as if the box had exhaled something long held. Inside the box lay an assortment of items, strange, ancient-looking objects, each more peculiar than the last. There were small vials filled with liquids that shimmered strangely in the light, ancient coins that appeared to have been weathered by time, and a delicate folded piece of parchment that was sealed with a dark wax. But what caught Watson's eye the most was a small, intricately carved key, glimmering with an ethereal light. Holmes's fingers hovered over the key, but he did not yet touch it. His gaze fixed on the parchment, his mind already working through the implications of what he saw. "This, Watson, is the key," Holmes said, his voice low and thoughtful. "Not just a key to the box, but to something much larger. Something tied to the Matthews family's past. We must understand what it opens, and what it has been guarding." Watson could not help but feel a rush of excitement, tempered by an underlying sense of unease. "What is it, Holmes? What does this all mean?" Holmes carefully lifted the sealed parchment, running his fingers along its edge. The wax seal was old, brittle, and seemed to resist being broken, as if it too were a part of the mystery, protecting the secrets within. But Holmes, ever patient, broke the seal with a single, careful motion and unfolded the parchment. The paper was fragile, yellowed with age but still legible. Holmes read aloud, "To those who have come after, to the ones who seek the truth within this box, beware. The key you hold is not a mere object but a symbol of power. It will unlock the past, but the past is a dangerous thing to unearth. The secret it reveals will change everything. Use it wisely, for it is not just your future that will be affected, but the legacy of those who have gone before you." Holmes paused, his voice trailing off as he absorbed the words. Watson sat back in his chair, his mind reeling with the implications. The box was not just an object, it was a vessel, a guardian of some long-forgotten secret, one that had been hidden for generations, waiting for the right person to unlock it. "The legacy of those who have gone before," Watson murmured, his thoughts echoing the words Holmes had just read. Could it be? Is this about more than just a family mystery? Holmes did not immediately respond, but his eyes were distant, focused on something only he could see. "I believe it is, Watson. The box has been waiting for someone who understands that the past is not just a series of events, but a force that shapes the present. It is a power that can change everything." Watson's heart quickened as he realized the enormity of what they were about to undertake. This was no ordinary case, no simple mystery to solve. The velvet box, with all its strange contents, had been guarding something far deeper, a secret that had the power to alter the course of history itself. Holmes carefully placed the key and the parchment back into the box, his mind already racing ahead. "We must tread carefully, Watson. What lies ahead is not just a puzzle to be solved. It is a journey into the unknown. The key we have found is only the beginning." As the box was closed once more, the silence that had filled the room seemed to grow even heavier, as though the very air itself was holding its breath. The past was calling, and soon they would answer. But what lay on the other side of the door the key would unlock was something neither Holmes nor Watson could yet comprehend. And with that, the mystery deepened, drawing them into its quiet, unyielding embrace. Chapter 6. The Burden of the Secret. The days following their discovery were filled with a strange, almost oppressive stillness. The room at 221B Baker Street, once alive with the usual hum of Holmes's investigations, had become a sanctuary of quiet thought. The velvet box, its secrets now partially revealed, lay on the desk like a dormant beast, its contents protected from the world by a lid that still held many mysteries. Sherlock Holmes, for all his mental acuity, was uncharacteristically subdued. His sharp gaze, so often focused on the smallest details, now seemed distant, lost in the depths of the puzzle that had consumed him. Dr. John Watson, ever the companion and confidant, could feel the weight of the silence that hung in the air. There was something unsettling about it, something in the way the box seemed to demand reflection without offering any answers. "Holmes," Watson ventured one morning, his voice gentle but laced with concern. "You've been unusually quiet these past few days. What are you thinking? Is there more to this secret than we realized?" Holmes, who had been staring at the box, did not immediately respond. The ticking of the clock on the mantel was the only sound in the room. It felt as though the very passage of time had slowed, drawing out the tension between them. Finally, Holmes turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "I believe we are only beginning to understand the true weight of this mystery, Watson," he said quietly. "This box is more than a mere object. It is a burden that has been passed down through generations, hidden and protected, with the understanding that some truths are too powerful to be known." Watson frowned, leaning forward. "But surely, if there is a secret to be revealed, it should be shared. Shouldn't the truth come to light?" Holmes's eyes darkened as he met Watson's gaze. "Not all truths are meant to be revealed, Watson. The message within this box is not just a family secret. It is a legacy, a weight that has been carried through the ages. And with it comes a responsibility. This box was never meant to be opened by just anyone. It was meant for someone with the strength to carry the burden of its knowledge." Watson felt a chill crawl up his spine. The weight of Holmes's words settled over him like a shadow. The box was no ordinary puzzle. It was a force, a catalyst for something much larger, and it had chosen them to uncover its truth. "But we've already begun to uncover it, haven't we?" Watson pressed, trying to make sense of the complexity. "We've found the key and the message. We've unlocked part of the secret." Holmes gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Yes, we have unlocked part of it. But the key, Watson, is not just a physical object. It is a symbol of something much deeper. The burden we carry is not one of mere knowledge. It is the responsibility that comes with knowing the truth. And that truth is far more dangerous than we can yet comprehend." The room seemed to grow colder as Holmes's words hung in the air, their weight pressing down on Watson's chest. The box, though closed again, now felt alive in a way it hadn't before. It was as if it were watching them, waiting for them to make the next move. Holmes stood up abruptly, walking across the room to the window. He looked out at the London skyline, the mist beginning to clear as the sun struggled to break through the clouds. "We must be careful, Watson," he said, his voice more somber than ever. "The knowledge we have unlocked is dangerous. It holds the power to change everything, to unravel not just the Matthews family's past, but perhaps our very understanding of history itself." Watson stood and joined Holmes by the window, looking out at the same view, though his thoughts were elsewhere. "But if we do not uncover it, if we leave this secret buried, then what? Will the burden fall on someone else? Will they be able to bear it? Holmes turned to him, his eyes piercing. Perhaps. But it is not just a question of whether someone else can bear the burden. It is a question of whether they should. The truth, once revealed, cannot be undone. Once we open that door, Watson, there is no turning back. The weight of his words settled heavily between them. Watson could feel the magnitude of what they were undertaking, the ripple effect of their actions, the consequences of opening the door to a long-hidden secret. It was as though they were standing on the edge of an abyss, and they had no choice but to leap. Holmes returned to the desk, his movements deliberate. He opened the box once more, and this time Watson could sense a subtle shift in the air, a tension that hummed between them. Holmes reached for the letter they had found earlier, the one that spoke of the key and the family's legacy. He carefully unfolded it, his eyes scanning the words once more. "To those who have come after," Holmes read aloud, "to the ones who seek the truth within this box, beware. The key you hold is not a mere object, but a symbol of power. It will unlock the past, but the past is a dangerous thing to unearth. The secret it reveals will change everything. Use it wisely, for it is not just your future that will be affected, but the legacy of those who have gone before you." Watson watched Holmes closely, his mind racing. The warning in the letter was clear. The secret they had uncovered was not just a piece of history. It was a power, a force that could alter the future, rippling outward with consequences they could not fully grasp. "This warning," Holmes murmured, his voice low. "It's not just a cautionary note. It's a command. The secret within this box has been buried for a reason. And now that we've uncovered it, we must decide whether we are worthy of knowing it." For a long moment, there was silence. The weight of Holmes's words hung in the air like a cloud, heavy with the implications of their next move. Finally, Watson spoke, his voice steady despite the uncertainty that gripped him. "And if we are worthy, Holmes? If we decide to open that door?" Holmes's gaze met his, and for the first time, Watson saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, an uncertainty that mirrored his own. "If we are worthy, Watson, then we must be prepared to bear the consequences. The truth, once revealed, will change everything. And with that change comes a burden we may not be able to carry." The room seemed to grow darker, the silence stretching between them, as though the very air had become thicker with the weight of what lay ahead. The box, now open before them, seemed to pulse with a quiet, knowing energy, as if it were waiting for them to make their choice. And in that moment, Watson realized that the true mystery was not the contents of the box. It was the decision they would have to make. To uncover the truth or leave it buried forever. The burden of the secret had been passed to them. Now they had to decide whether they were ready to bear it. Chapter 7. The final puzzle. The days that followed were filled with an ever-growing sense of anticipation. The quiet weight of the velvet box, now fully opened, sat like a looming presence in the room. Sherlock Holmes, ever calm and composed, had not spoken much in the days since their discovery. His usual sharpness seemed dulled, his gaze often distant, as though he was reflecting on something far beyond the case at hand. Dr. John Watson, ever the practical companion, could feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere, a change that was almost imperceptible but nonetheless significant. The case had ceased to be about mere investigation. It had become something more. It was late afternoon when Watson entered the apartment to find Holmes standing by the window, staring out at the streets below. The fog, which had become a familiar companion to them, clung to the city in a soft, grey veil. The city was alive, yet Holmes stood as still as ever, lost in thought. "Holmes?" Watson called softly, stepping into the room. "What is it?" "You seem distant." Holmes didn't turn, his eyes fixed on the view outside. "The fog," he said quietly. "It holds the city in a suspended silence, Watson. Much like the mystery we are facing. And like the fog, the answers we seek are hidden, waiting to be revealed in their own time." Watson felt a shiver run down his spine. Holmes's words had an almost prophetic quality to them, as though he could sense that they were on the cusp of uncovering something monumental. "Do you have a plan, then?" Watson asked, a mixture of anxiety and curiosity in his voice. Holmes finally turned to face him, his expression serene but tinged with something darker, a shadow that lingered in his eyes. "I believe the time has come, Watson. We have reached the final puzzle. The answers we seek are now within our grasp, but to unlock them, we must understand the true nature of the box and of the legacy it carries." He gestured to the velvet box now resting on the desk in front of them. It was no longer just an object of curiosity. It had become something far greater, an enigma that had grown in both significance and danger the more they had uncovered. Holmes stepped closer to the desk, his fingers hovering just above the box. He did not touch it yet, as if waiting for some unseen signal. The contents of this box were not meant to be discovered by just anyone. It has waited for the right moment, the right mind, to reveal its secrets. Watson watched in silence, feeling the growing tension between them. The box, though still closed, seemed to pulse with a hidden energy, a quiet power that was undeniable. For the first time, Watson understood the weight of Holmes's words. They were not just investigating a case. They were confronting something ancient, something far beyond their understanding. Holmes turned to Watson, his eyes dark with the knowledge that had been gathering within him. "The key we found," he said slowly, "is not just a physical key. It is a symbol of understanding, of unlocking not just the past but the future. And with it comes a responsibility, one that I fear we are not fully prepared for." The weight of Holmes's words hung in the air, thick and heavy. Watson could feel the air in the room grow dense, as though the very atmosphere had shifted, thickening with the gravity of what they were about to do. The box, once a mere object of mystery, now seemed to represent something much more profound, something that held the fate of not just the Matthews family, but perhaps even their own. "Holmes," Watson asked, his voice low, "are we certain we should open it? What if this is something we're not meant to know?" Holmes's gaze softened, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something like regret in his eyes. "We have already uncovered so much, Watson. We cannot turn back now. The box has revealed what it needed to, but the true revelation is still hidden within. And it is time we faced it." With a deep breath, Holmes reached out and carefully lifted the box from the desk. His hands were steady, almost reverent as he turned it over, running his fingers along the intricate embroidery on its velvet surface. Slowly, he placed it in front of him, the lid now facing upward. The soft clicking sound from before, the sound that had opened the box, lingered in the back of Watson's mind, a reminder of the moment they had crossed the threshold into the unknown. Holmes's eyes flicked briefly to Watson's before he gently began to pry the box open, his movements deliberate and measured. The silence in the room was profound, broken only by the quiet rustle of fabric as the lid of the box shifted open. As the box opened fully, revealing its contents once more, the air seemed to change. A subtle shift, like the pulling of a veil, allowed something, an energy, a presence, to seep into the room. Watson felt it before he saw it, a subtle vibration in the air, a whisper of something ancient and powerful. Inside the box, something had changed. The small, intricately carved key was still there, glimmering faintly in the dim light, but beside it lay a new object, one that had not been there before. It was a small, weathered book, bound in faded leather, its pages yellowed with age. The book was unmarked, its cover plain except for a single symbol, a strange, swirling pattern that seemed to pulse with an inner light. Holmes reached for the book with the same careful reverence he had shown the box, his fingers brushing lightly against its surface. "This, Watson," he said quietly, "is the final piece. The true secret of the box lies within these pages." Watson leaned in, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him like a heavy fog. He had expected something profound, but the simplicity of the book, the quiet, unassuming presence it held, felt even more significant than any elaborate mystery or ancient artifact could. The book was a symbol in itself. It was the culmination of everything they had uncovered, yet it was also the beginning of something far more intricate. Holmes slowly opened the book, his eyes scanning the first few pages. Watson watched as the pages, though fragile, seemed to absorb the light, drawing him into the mystery with a quiet magnetism. "Do you understand it, Holmes?" Watson asked, his voice barely a whisper. Holmes paused, his fingers resting on the page. "It is not a matter of understanding, Watson. It is a matter of choice. What lies within these pages is not just a history, it is a prophecy, a promise, and a warning. We must be prepared for what comes next." As Holmes continued to read, Watson could sense the change in the air. The final piece of the puzzle had been set in motion, and there was no turning back. The mystery had not only been solved, it had unraveled into something far larger, something that was still unfolding, still waiting to be understood. In the silence that followed, Watson knew that the next steps they took would not just reveal the past, they would shape the future. And as the book lay open before them, its secrets waiting to be uncovered, they had no choice but to continue on this path, to face whatever the legacy of the velvet box had in store. And with that, the final puzzle was laid before them. The answers they sought were within reach, but so too was the burden of knowing them. The choice, as always, would be theirs to make. Chapter 8. The Hidden Path. The room at 221. B. Baker Street was unnaturally still, and the silence seemed to stretch into eternity. The world outside London's foggy streets continued its steady rhythm, but within the walls of the apartment, time itself seemed to be holding its breath. Sherlock Holmes, who had so often been the master of his surroundings, was now a figure of quiet reflection, sitting by the desk with the leather-bound book opened before him. The once clear mystery of the velvet box had unfolded into something deeper, darker, and infinitely more complex. Dr. John Watson, standing in the doorway, couldn't help but feel a certain unease. The weight of the knowledge they had uncovered, the book, the key, the legacy, had settled like a fog between them, clouding the air with an unspoken tension. Holmes, usually so sharp and decisive, now seemed lost in the intricacies of what they had discovered. It was as if the answer they sought was just out of reach, hidden within the pages of the book, yet it remained tantalizingly elusive. "Holmes?" Watson asked softly, his voice cutting through the stillness. "What have you found?" Holmes's eyes, which had been fixed on the book for what felt like an eternity, slowly lifted to meet Watson's gaze. There was a quiet sadness in his eyes, a flicker of something heavy that he had not yet shared. For a moment, Watson thought that Holmes might remain silent, as he often did when the weight of a case became too much. But then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the burden of 1,000 unspoken thoughts, Holmes closed the book gently and looked at Watson. "It's not just a family secret, Watson," Holmes said, his voice low, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "The Matthews family history is bound to something much older, something far more dangerous than we could have anticipated. The book, It holds not just the past, but a warning, a map, if you will, of the hidden paths that one might take to unravel the full mystery. Watson felt a chill pass through him as Holmes's words sank in. A map? What kind of map, Holmes? Holmes didn't immediately answer. Instead, he stood and walked to the window, his back turned to Watson. The fog outside had thickened, the city below cloaked in an eerie silence. The air in the room felt thick, charged with anticipation. It was as if they were on the precipice of something monumental, yet terrifying. The map in this book is not of physical locations, Holmes continued, his voice quiet but steady. It is a map of the mind. The path it reveals is not one of steps and streets. It is the path of choices. It shows the ways that one can take, the decisions that can be made, leading to the final revelation. But what is troubling, Watson, is that some of these paths are dangerous. The book warns that not everyone who walks these paths is meant to reach the end. Some paths lead to destruction, Watson. Though he had often followed Holmes through the most intricate of mysteries, now felt a deep unease. He had been drawn into cases of intrigue and danger before, but this felt different. The weight of the unknown pressed on him, and for the first time, he wondered if perhaps they had uncovered something that was better left untouched. "So, you believe that the book is guiding us?" Watson asked, though the words felt strange as they left his mouth. "But guiding us where? To what?" Holmes turned back toward him, his face impassive but his eyes filled with a quiet urgency. "To the truth, Watson. The book reveals the truth of the Matthews family, but it also reveals the cost of that truth. It shows the way forward, but it does not guarantee safety. The family's legacy, what they were protecting, what they were hiding, is tied to something that stretches back centuries. And now, that truth is coming to the surface." Holmes paused, his hand resting on the edge of the desk. "But there is more. You see, Watson, the truth is not something that can be revealed easily. It is a burden. The book warns that the path we are on, the path of discovery, leads us closer to something that has the potential to change everything we know." Watson stepped closer, his mind racing. "What do you mean, change everything?" "Holmes, what exactly are we dealing with?" Holmes's gaze softened, and for a moment he seemed to look beyond Watson as though seeing something far off in the distance. "I believe, Watson, that we are dealing with something that goes beyond the Matthews family. The legacy they protected was not just theirs. It was a legacy that had been passed down through time, meant for someone who could understand the magnitude of what they were guarding. And now, that someone is us." There was a heavy pause between them. The silence felt thick, like a living thing that had crawled into the room and was now holding its breath, waiting for the next move. The weight of Holmes's words hung heavily in the air, and Watson could not help but feel that they had crossed a line, that they were now entwined in something much larger than a simple family mystery. Holmes turned back to the desk and opened the book once more, his fingers lightly brushing over the pages as he scanned its contents. There, in the margins of the page, were new words, strange symbols that seemed to shift and change as he read them. Watson stepped closer, drawn by the strange markings. "It's a riddle," Holmes said softly, almost to himself. "A final riddle. One last test before the truth can be revealed. The symbols are a key, but they are not meant to be solved in the way we are accustomed to. This is not about intellect alone, Watson. It's about understanding. It's about trust, Watson." His heart racing, leaned over to look at the symbols. They seemed to shift under his gaze, like they were alive, reacting to the presence of someone who was trying to understand them. The markings weren't just letters. They were patterns, intricate and deliberate, as if they were meant to be deciphered not with logic, but with intuition. "What do you see, Holmes?" Watson asked, his voice low. Holmes's eyes narrowed as he studied the symbols. "They are the final path. A hidden way, one that only the truly worthy can follow. The book tells us that those who seek the truth must be willing to face the cost, to walk a path of shadows before they can reach the light." The room seemed to grow darker, the weight of the words heavy in the air. Watson could almost hear the faint echo of footsteps, like a distant memory pulling them forward. Holmes closed the book gently and turned to Watson, his expression resolute. "We must decide, Watson. The path is before us, and the choice is ours. We can continue, but we must be prepared for what lies ahead. There is no turning back once we choose." In that moment, Watson understood. They were no longer just solving a mystery. They were facing a crossroads, and the path they chose would shape everything that came after. The truth was within reach, but so too was the cost of knowing it. The question, as always, was whether they were willing to pay the price. And as the fog outside thickened, sealing the city in a quiet shroud, Watson knew that they were about to step into the unknown, into the hidden path that the book had laid before them. Chapter 9. The Key to the Truth. The days had passed in a blur of quiet reflection and mounting tension. The fog had lifted slightly over London, but within the walls of 221B Baker Street, the atmosphere remained thick with the unspoken weight of their discovery. The leather-bound book, with its cryptic symbols and veiled messages, had revealed more than they had anticipated. Yet, there was still one truth they hadn't uncovered, one final step to take before the full secret could be revealed. And Holmes, as always, was waiting for the right moment to move forward. Sherlock Holmes had not spoken much since their last revelation. His mind, always so sharp and quick, now seemed to be lost in a quiet contemplation, as though he were trying to piece together something that had yet to fully take shape. Dr. John Watson, though eager to move forward, couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that had settled into his chest. They had uncovered the truth, yes, but the deeper they dug, the more they realized that the mystery of the velvet box, the Matthews family, and the legacy hidden within it was not merely a puzzle. It was a turning point, a threshold that led to something far larger. The morning arrived with a heavy stillness, the kind of day where the fog still lingered in the air, but the sun seemed unwilling to break through. Holmes sat at his desk, the book before him once again, its pages open to the strange symbols that had confounded them both. Watson stood by the window, staring out at the muted city, unsure of what to say or what to feel. They had come so far, but had they truly uncovered everything? Was this mystery truly meant to be solved? "Holmes?" Watson asked, his voice a soft whisper that seemed to break the stillness. "What do you see now? Have you found the final clue?" Holmes did not turn immediately. His fingers hovered over the pages of the book, tracing the symbols that danced like shadows beneath his touch. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then finally Holmes spoke, his voice low and measured, as though he were considering each word carefully before it left his lips. "It is here, Watson," he said quietly. "The final key to the truth lies within the symbols we have yet to decipher. I was wrong to assume that they were merely a riddle. They are not just patterns, they are instructions, a guide to what lies ahead." Watson's heart quickened. Instructions? For what? Holmes turned toward him, his eyes sharp with the intensity of someone who had just made a momentous discovery. "For the next step, Watson. We have followed the path of this mystery, but it is not enough to simply understand what has happened in the past. We must now look forward, into the future. The book, this entire case, is not merely about unraveling history. It is about understanding our place in the story, and once we do, The truth will reveal itself for a moment. Watson stood motionless, trying to absorb Holmes's words. The gravity of what he was saying weighed heavily on him. The mystery had never been just about the Matthews family or the velvet box. It had been about something much larger, something that had been set into motion long ago. "And what is that truth?" Watson asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Holmes's eyes darkened as he picked up the small, intricately carved key that had first appeared in the box. He turned it over in his fingers, examining it as if it were both an object of great significance and a puzzle he had yet to fully solve. "This key," Holmes said softly, "is more than a physical object. It is the key to understanding the legacy of the Matthews family, and the key to unlocking a deeper truth. But it is also a key to something else, something that has been hidden, not just in the past, but in the very fabric of our own lives." Watson's breath caught in his throat as he moved closer. "What do you mean?" "Hidden in the fabric of our own lives." Holmes's gaze shifted to the window, his expression distant, almost contemplative. "The truth we seek, Watson, is not just one of family secrets or long-buried histories. It is the truth of who we are, of the choices we make. The legacy we have uncovered is not only the Matthews family's, it is all of ours. The symbols in this book, the patterns in the key, they show us that the paths we walk, the decisions we make, are all connected. All of us are tied to something larger, something that reaches across time." Watson stepped back, overwhelmed by the magnitude of Holmes's revelation. The mystery had always seemed like an intellectual puzzle, a series of clues to be pieced together. But now, it felt like something far more personal. The legacy of the Matthews family, the box, the key. It was all leading to something far more profound than he had realized. "But if the key is to unlock the truth of who we are," Watson said slowly, his voice filled with doubt, "then why haven't we found it already? Why hasn't it revealed itself completely?" Holmes gave a small, knowing smile. "Because the key is not about finding the truth. It's about understanding it. The truth, Watson, is not something we can simply uncover. It is something we must accept. And only when we do, only when we truly understand that we are a part of something much larger than ourselves, will the mystery reveal its final answer." There was a deep, contemplative silence between them as the weight of Holmes's words settled in. For the first time, Watson felt that the mystery they had been chasing was not something outside of themselves. It was within them, intertwined with their own lives, their own choices. Holmes closed the book with a quiet snap, the finality of the gesture echoing through the room. "The path is clear now, Watson," he said, his voice steady and calm. "We must walk it. The key is in our hands, and with it, we must choose the next step." Watson looked at the small key in Holmes's hand, its carved surface gleaming in the dim light. The mystery was no longer just about solving a case. It was about facing something deeper, something that would change them both. The key was not just an object to unlock a box. It was a key to their own understanding, to the very essence of who they were. And as they stood there in the stillness of the room, Watson knew that they had reached the precipice of something much larger than they had ever anticipated. The final puzzle was before them, and now it was up to them to decide how to walk the path that lay ahead. The truth was waiting, but it was not a truth that could be easily understood. It was a truth that had to be embraced, and the cost of knowing it might be more than either of them was prepared to bear. Chapter 10. The Final Revelation. The room at 221B Baker Street was bathed in a golden light as the evening sun began to sink behind the rooftops of London. The familiar murmur of the city below seemed distant, muffled by the thick fog that had rolled back in from the Thames. Yet within the walls of the apartment, everything felt still, as though time itself had slowed, holding its breath in anticipation. Sherlock Holmes stood by the window, his silhouette framed by the fading light. His hands were clasped behind his back, his gaze lost in the haze outside. He had not spoken much since the last discovery, the revelation of the key that had unlocked the deeper meaning of the Matthews family's legacy. Watson, ever the observer, could see that Holmes was at a crossroads, his mind racing to connect the final pieces of the puzzle. The mystery that had begun with a simple family heirloom had unfolded into something much greater, something that transcended time and history. "Holmes?" Watson asked softly, unable to hold back his curiosity. "What now? What do we do with what we've uncovered?" Holmes turned slowly, his eyes reflecting the quiet intensity of someone on the edge of discovery. "Watson, the final truth is not one we can merely understand. It must be experienced. The key we've found, the symbols, the book, they've all pointed us toward this moment. But now we must face the question, are we prepared to accept what lies ahead?" Watson felt a knot form in his stomach, a sense of foreboding rising within him. This case, which had begun as a simple mystery of a family secret, had become something far more profound. It was as though they were on the brink of unveiling not just a hidden past, but something that could reshape everything they knew. And yet, there was a quiet, soothing certainty in Holmes's demeanor, a calmness that suggested he had already made peace with the path they were about to walk. "We've come this far," Watson said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "What do we need to do next?" Holmes stepped toward the desk where the velvet box and the book still rested. He reached out, carefully picking up the key, turning it over in his hands as if it were the most delicate of objects. "The key, Watson, is not just an object to unlock a door. It is a symbol of understanding, of knowledge. But it is also a burden, one that we must choose to carry." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of what they implied. Watson watched as Holmes's fingers traced the engraved patterns on the key, his touch light but purposeful. "We are at the edge of something," Holmes continued, his voice steady. "Something that no one before us has had the strength to confront." The book spoke of a legacy, of a family bound to a secret so great that it was hidden away for centuries. But what it doesn't tell us, Watson, is that this secret is not just the Matthews family's. It is all of ours. This truth has been waiting to be discovered, and now we are the ones who must decide what to do with it. A shiver ran down Watson's spine as Holmes's words sank in. The mystery was no longer just about uncovering a family secret. It was about confronting a truth so vast that it could change the very fabric of their understanding. "The path is laid before us," Holmes said, his voice softer now. "The key we hold does not unlock a door to the past. It unlocks a door to the future. And with that, Watson, comes a choice. We can walk through it, accepting what lies on the other side, or we can turn away, leaving the truth locked forever." Watson's mind raced as he considered the enormity of Holmes's words. He had always prided himself on his logical thinking, his ability to solve problems and uncover answers. But this was different. The truth they were about to face was not something that could be understood with reason alone. It was a truth that demanded acceptance, a willingness to embrace something larger than themselves. "We cannot turn back, can we?" Watson said, his voice filled with quiet realization. Holmes met his gaze, his eyes steady and unwavering. "No, Watson. The path we've begun to walk leads only forward. But understand this, the truth we seek is not one that can be easily understood. It will change us, just as it has changed those who have walked this path before us. Holmes placed the key back into the velvet box, closing it gently, as though sealing away something both precious and dangerous. The room was filled with a quiet silence, and for a moment, neither of them moved. They stood there side by side, knowing that they had reached the point of no return. "What happens now?" Watson asked, his voice barely a whisper. Holmes's answer was simple, yet profound. "Now, we must trust that we are ready." And with that, the final truth of the velvet box, its legacy, its burden, was laid before them. It was no longer just a case to be solved, no longer just a mystery to be unraveled. It was a turning point, a decision that would shape not just their futures, but the future of everything they knew. In the soft glow of the evening light, the mystery that had begun with a single box had finally come full circle. The answers they had sought were no longer hidden in the shadows. They were out in the open, waiting to be accepted, waiting to be understood. But the truth was not something that could be easily grasped. It was something that had to be lived. As Watson stood there watching Holmes's steady hand close the velvet box for the final time, he realized that the true mystery was not in the answers they had uncovered, but in the choice they had made to uncover them. The truth had been revealed, and with it came the weight of knowing